Welcome to Chef Richard's Kitchen. I'm Chef Richard Miller. Well, everybody by now pretty much knows how I love to go back in history and look up some of the old classic dishes and then go back and look up some of the original recipes and see how they've changed since the time they were originally created till the time, present time. And we did that once before with the Reuben, where we went back to the Blackstone Hotel and Bernie Schimmel. We did that, a couple of episodes ago when we did Crab Louie. Now, today, I'm going to go back and do another one, and this is Lobster Newberg. And Lobster Newberg has an interesting history behind it, and it didn't start out as Lobster Newberg. It started out a sea captain by the name of Captain Benjamin Winberg, who was an extremely wealthy captain who specialized in the fruit trade. In 1876, he called the owner, who was now Charles Delmonico, over, and he asked him if he couldn't have a brazier or a saute set up, because he wanted to show him a recipe that he'd actually come up with. Where the origins are from, I don't know. Anyway, Charles Delmonico went ahead and, says fine, brought it out, and Captain Winberg actually fixed him a dish that was just absolutely amazing. And I hear that Charles Delmonico was not an easy person, to make happy, but he just grinned and says, "This is absolutely delicious." He called his executive chef, or just chef as they knew him back then, Charles Ranhofer, out, and he let him taste it, who also thought, that it was absolutely delicious. The demand was just unreal. Patrons loved it. He named it Lobster Winberg in honor of Captain Winberg, who'd brought it to him. Now, let's fast forward a few more years. Charles Delmonico and Captain Winberg had a falling out. What it was about, who knows? It was probably what most huge arguments start out over, nothing really. But anyway, it ended up with Captain Winberg being banned from the Delmonico, so it must have been a huge blow up. And Charles Delmonico taking the Lobster Winberg off the menu. Says, well, good riddance. He probably, gave him a single-fingered salute when he was going out the door. Or Captain Winberg did, one or the other. Or maybe both. Anyway, that didn't set well with Delmonico's patrons. And they says, we want it back. We don't give a darn who you had an argument with. We loved it. We want it back. Well, Charles Delmonico turned around and still said, no, we're not going to bring it back in honor of, Captain Winberg. And then he thought about it for a while and realized, wait a minute, that's a huge, money maker. Maybe he will bring it back. But he didn't want to honor Captain Winberg with it anymore, so he changed a couple of letters around, and it became Lobster Newberg at that point. Or, as some people still call it today, Lobster Delmonico. Anyway, let's get started. I went back and, Chef Ronhofer wrote the cookbook, Epicurean? And in the, I believe it was 1894 edition, he actually published the recipe for lobster Newberg. Bear in mind that like most recipes, chefs are known for just say, put this in, put that in, put this in, put that in. I've been guilty of it too. And in fact, I go back and I think if you guys are going to reproduce this at home, you know, you got to have a starting point. But here is the original Charles Ronhofer recipe. And it's cooked 6 lobsters, each weighing 2 pounds in boiled salt water for 25 minutes. 12 pounds of lobster brings you out, you know, about 2.5 pounds of meat and 3 or 4 ounces of coral. Now, lobster coral is actually the roe or the eggs from the female lobster, which are absolutely delicious, edible and delicious. You know, most of the time when we eat lobster, we throw it into the water, we bring it out, and we throw all that away. But, you know, the coral or the roe as they call it, you know, is delicious. When cold, detach the bodies from the tail and cut the latter into slices. Well, we've already gone ahead and I've cut the tail off. Well, I bought the tails anyway. So, put them in a sautoir. And a sautoir is a name for a saute pan with straight up and down edges. You know, and most of the time you see me use a saute pan, which is more of a skillet. Well, a sautoir, you know, has straight up and down sides on it. Each piece lying flat, add hot butter, season with salt, and pretty much fry lightly on each side, but do not color. In other words, we're not browning it. We're just making sure that it's cooked, you know, so the butter gets in there. Moisten with good raw cream, reduce to half, and then add some Madeira wine. Boil the liquids once more to remove and thicken, and the thickening of egg yolk and raw cream. Cook without boiling, adding a little cayenne pepper and butter. Serve over toast point, can. So let's start out by first, I've got a pot of water here. It's actually salted water. And the reason is because that kind of salts the lobster meat. We're up about 192 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and it'll probably take another 5-6 minutes. I'm not going to make you wait, so I'll just go ahead and kind of cut it off here, and I'll come back. All right, our water's come to a good rolling boil, so now it's time to put our lobster in. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this in our salted water, such. And we're going to let it cook, as Chef Ronhofer said, for about 25 minutes. Now, here's something that I do want to tell you, because people are going to go out and they're going to get a lobster and they want to cook the whole lobster. Now, when you buy a lobster, you get it live. I just happened to get these and I got the shells, or the tails. Anyway, when you get a live lobster, use a large pot, and I mean larger than this. Have a lot of water in there so that when you drop the lobster in, it doesn't cool the water down, and make sure that it's at a rolling boil. Now, why do I say this? The reason is because they generally, a live lobster, unless it actually has the tail and the claws cut off, as soon as it dies, it starts releasing a nasty enzyme in there, which makes everything Tastes horrible. So what they do is they have to go ahead and they have to cook them live. And as you know, as cruel as it seems, if your water is hot and boiling vigorously, it's instantaneous. If it's warm, you know, they suffer. And to me, that's cruel, it's inhumane. So make sure that you have a large pot that has lots and lots of water in there. It's at a rolling boil, and so that way when you put your lobster in, it doesn't cool it down to where it quits boiling. Okay? Now, what I'll do is I'll get off my soapbox right here, and I'm going to shut this down because we've probably got, you know, another 23 or 22 minutes left on this. And if I left you sitting here for 22 minutes, my viewers would revolt. So, I'll be right back. Okay, it's been 25 minutes, and if you look at the lobster now, you'll see that it's gone from a green to an orange color. All right, now that's cooked. Now remember though that when you go ahead and you throw lobster into a pot, just because it turns orange doesn't necessarily mean it's cooked all the way through. So make sure that you cook it long enough that it is, but also make sure you got plenty of water in there, plenty hot, so that the lobster's killed instantly. So let's go ahead and let's take, I'm going to take these out of the pot. That had some water in the inside. All right, and I'm going to let these cool down for about, well, probably 15-20 minutes. What I want to do is I want to take a knife and I want to cut them in half lengthwise, and I just want them cool down a little bit. So anyway, let me go ahead and let them cool down. All right, the lobster's cooled now. And so what I'm going to do is I want to take these tails and I want to pretty much cut them in half lengthwise. And really, the shell isn't that tough. So it isn't that tough to cut them in half. Now that the lobsters are cut in half, now it's time we have to go ahead and we have to pull the meat out. And this is usually done by just putting, you know, your finger, your thumb or something like that under it. And just pulling and just pushing the meat out. All right, now that our lobster's cooled down, I cut them into halves, and I went ahead and dug the meat out with my thumbnail. Now let's go ahead and let's cut them up into kind of bite-sized pieces here. Okay, now our lobster's cut up. Now let's go ahead and go on to the next step, which is going to be kind of sauteing them with butter and the cream. Okay, now that our lobster's all cut up, I'm going to take and I'm going to add about 5 tablespoons of butter to my pan. I'm going to go ahead and let that melt down. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to saute our lobster in there just to infuse the butter and give it a real nice taste. All right, now that our lobster is sauteed, I want to take it, I want to put in, about 3/4 of a cup of cream. And we're going to go ahead and let that reduce for a minute. All right, now I want to add just about a pinch of cayenne, and I don't think that's enough, so I'm going to put in just a little bit more, but not much. Remember, this stuff is hot. And probably about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. We'll just let that go ahead and simmer for a little bit. And in the meantime, we're going to take 3 egg yolks and we're going to mix them in with the rest of the cream. Okay, now we're going to take a little of our hot cream mixture and we're going to put that into our egg and cream because we want to temper it. Now, if we don't temper this, what's going to happen? We're going to throw our egg cream mixture in there and it's going to become scrambled eggs. And that's not exactly what we want. So, we temper it. And then we add it slowly. to our lobster mixture. Okay, now it's thickening very, very well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take and we're going to add about 3 tablespoons of either sherry, or not sherry, Madeira wine, or cognac. And what I've done is I put about a tablespoon of cognac and probably, a couple of tablespoons of Madeira wine. Now, one thing I got to remind you of, I'm using an induction plate here. All right? If you're doing this over a flame or a gas furnace, remember, that when you add this, all that alcohol is going to be burned off and evaporated. So if you have an open flame, you may end up with, flambe, which is fine. That's what you want. Just make sure you don't have your head over it. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to let this reduce just a little more. Very good. I kind of get a little taste of the alcohol because it hasn't completely burned off yet, but it's still very, very, very good. So let me go ahead and finish this and clean up a little bit, and it's going to be about time to plate. So well, our lobster with Newberg sauce is actually done right now, so it's time to plate. But one thing we have to do is lobster Newberg is served over, as Chef Ronhofer put it, toast. All right? As you'll see in most recipes nowadays, they say puff pastry. And so what I've done is I've done both. This is just Pepperidge Farm puff pastry. And they come 6 in a package. And you put them on an ungreased baking sheet at about 425 and put them in for about, 18-20 minutes, something like that. And they come out looking like this. Like I just put under the detail camera here. So that's one way of doing it. But, according to Chef Ronhofer, the way that he always served it was on toast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do both. I'm going to serve it both with a puff pastry and with, serve it over toast. So now, if you take and you serve it over a puff pastry, just take and pull the center out of that so that you have some place to put your lobster. And then same with the toast. Make sure there's plenty of room to put your lobster on top of that. All right, now let's go ahead and I'm going to clean up a little bit on this plate. All right. Now, if you're using the puff pastry, go ahead and put the center back on it again like this. All right, now it's time to garnish. And really, one of the things you can always put with lobster Newberg is you can always put buttered asparagus. Alright. So I'll put that down there. Once again, kind of clean up a little bit. Now for garnish, you can either put a lemon wedge, which I really like, or you can just take and put some parsley. And in this case, I'm just using Italian flat leaf parsley. All right, and there we go, all plated and ready. Now, one of the things, you know, I always tell you to do is taste it, and I have delicious. You could taste the lobster, you could taste the cream, you could definitely taste the sherry in there. Everything comes together really well. Everything blends. Everything's really balanced. So, here we go. Once again, and I'll put under the detail camera so you can see it well. Once again, you know, we have a dish you can be very, very proud of. This is one of those, it's one you can serve to guests. It's very, very impressive. Just saying you're fixing lobster Newberg says, you know, that you think a lot of them and you're preparing them the best. And it really does. So, once again, please remember, you know, give it a try. Let me know how you do. Send me a comment, send me an email, you know, send me a single finger up if you want. But anyway, let me know how it turns out. And if you have any problem or any questions, let me know about that so we can get that straightened out as well. Once again, thank you for letting me, you know, come into your home. Thank you for joining me this time. Take care. God bless. Give me a thumbs up on this. And more importantly, subscribe. And if you know anybody that likes to cook and hasn't subscribed, ask them to subscribe too. You know, the more the merrier. And in the meantime, we'll see you next episode. Bye for now.